For this section, we look at the human consequences of climate change. So far, we've been mostly focused on what's happening, why it's happening, putting it into context in terms of the bigger picture of Earth's history and all that it's been through. Now we kind of bring things back to the here and now, right? People are suffering as a result of everything we've talked about, which is why we bother to talk about it to begin with. But why, how, in what ways, right? How would you even approach something like this? So the full extent of all the consequences of climate change would be like an entire degree, basically. So we're going to greatly reduce that down to a small number of the factors which are going to be the most important. Like what? Flooding would be one of them, related to extreme precipitation events, right? Evaporation is increased. Why? Because temperatures are higher. So precipitation events tend to be supercharged and more intense as a result, which leads to flooding. And as we'll see in so many cases, right, making flooding 5% worse can have 10,000 times the impact, right? It's not really a matter of, precipitation being a little bit worse, therefore the impact is a little bit worse. When it comes to the human costs and the economic and monetary costs of disasters, the disasters themselves being a little bit worse means that the consequences and the costs go up exponentially. This is also magnified by the trends of urbanization, right? Where people are concentrating themselves into areas, especially areas along the coast. Image here comes from floods in Pakistan. I believe this particular photo is from 2021, although, as we'll see, these are frequent. So flooding would be number one on our list. Second would be heat waves, so people struggling to keep cool, struggling to make sure that they're able to keep cool as they do all the things that they need to do: work, live, talk to each other, eat. Flooding, heat waves, drought would be third on our list, and this one will definitely come back up when we talk about geopolitics. And then finally would be intensified storms and natural disasters. One important distinction I would want to make here, right? So the location on Earth where cyclones appear to be getting more intense the fastest is in the North Atlantic, in the east coast of the United States. It would definitely be a hot spot on that one. And something else we should distinguish, just because it can easily be confused, it's not necessarily that these events are getting more frequent, but they are getting more intense. So those are kind of two different parts of the equation. Are they getting more intense? Absolutely. Are they getting more frequent? That one is hard to statistically piece out. Awesome. We can look at some examples, especially of the ways that these disasters of flooding, heat waves, drought, and other, storms and hurricanes and massive events like that can sort of compound each other, right? So as an example case study, so this is Lake Charles in Louisiana. We notice we are not far from the coast. It's a relatively small town, not well off. This town has had issues where there are flooding events and storms every single year. So these are the so-called compounding or cascading effects of disasters. What does that mean? It means that each disaster that a place experiences makes it less well equipped for the next one. And when that is combined with the fact that human beings are concentrating themselves into cities, and the fact that, the disaster events themselves are becoming either more intense or more frequent or both. And you kind of wind up with like a runaway train, right? So there's a flood or some sort of storm event which totally knocks a town on its feet, but that happens every year, and recovery cannot happen in a year. So before the area has recovered from the last disaster, they have a new one. And to give another example of this, so this is the town of Talent in far southern Oregon. Mostly, right, we've got pine trees, a lot of forests and wooded areas, and so they have a fire season every single year. And what is beginning to happen in Talent and in other places is you have a fire season, right? Forest fire comes in, destroys lives, wipes out homes, and does tremendous damage to the environment. And people start to rebuild, but it takes longer than a year to rebuild. So they are dealing with a new fire season before everybody has fully recovered and bounced back from the old fire season. And so even, as we've said, right, slightly making those disasters worse can cause a compounding effect that has exponentially worse effects on human beings, because now there's another fire season before we've recovered from the previous one. Okay, in the context of the world as a whole, what should be, the biggest priorities in terms of the consequences of climate change? Not everything can be the highest priorities. Sea level rise is one of them, especially considering that human beings are concentrating themselves in cities and the fact that human beings like to live on the coast and do live on the coast around the entire world. So this, right, is the expected number of people in millions of people who are expected to be displaced by sea level, I believe by 2100. And I will get myself out of the way. So these are by 2100 under two different scenarios, right? 2 degrees C of warming, 4 degrees C of warming. And for reference, right now, right this minute, we're at something like 1.4 degrees C of warming. So pretty bad. So as a result of sea level rise, you have people who can no longer live where they once did, and it's not really a transient thing, right? Once the sea level goes up, it doesn't go back down, and so you can have tens to hundreds of millions of people who are displaced from these areas, right? And especially bad in East Asia, South Asia, right? China, India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, right? Part of the danger here is that what is at first an issue of climate becomes a refugee crisis, which can become a geopolitical conflict. So for the reasons which are laid bare right here, climate change and war can't really be disentangled from each other. They are in many ways part of the same issue, right? So it is extremely possible, for example, for sea level rise to displace tens of millions of people in India, and as a result, cause issues the big nuclear flashpoint in Pakistan, which is what we'll get into for the next section.